Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to talk to you guys a little bit about natural limits of what a person can expect to gain through years of training drug-free in terms of overall muscle mass. So let me put on my +5 out of weaponsmithing, work on skilling my crafting a little bit, and let's talk about this because a lot of people get questions about it. Like I've said in the past, somewhere between 20 and 30 pounds of muscle mass is a reasonable expectation if you train really hard, train consistent, and keep it up for many years. All right. Now, a lot of people will say things like, because I've said that as a rule and then I've broken down caveats to it, people start to try to come up with the exceptions to the rule. What if you started when you're 15? Well, if you started when you're 15, you have to account for your normal muscle and bone and organ growth and everything else also. All right, and that's a big difference because when you're 15, from the time that you're 15 till the time that you're 21, even if you don't work out, you're going to gain muscle. You're probably going to gain several inches of height. You're going to gain several pounds of bone. You're going to gain a pound or two of organs. And you're going to gain several pounds of muscle just from your body continuing to grow. So obviously you can't use people like that as an example because you'll get people who are like, well, I have less body fat now than when I started at 15 and I'm 25 now and I'm 40 pounds heavier. See how that works? They might have gained 25 or even 30 pounds through the course of their training. But they also gained bone weight and normal muscle weight because your muscles get longer as your bones grow. Your muscles will actually get slightly thicker as you get taller also. You fill out a little bit. It has nothing to do with training response. You didn't gain that weight as a result of training. You grew that as a result of growing up. Now the other thing to look at is a couple different things: frame size, genetics, everything else, and starting point. And what I mean is, if a person is healthy, either at a normal body weight, or maybe they even started a little heavier, that's what we can expect to gain. In fact, if they started a little heavier, they might gain less muscle. Why? Because being overweight adds muscle to you unless you're completely sedentary. But a sedentary person who gains 100 pounds of fat is going to gain a little bit of muscle with it too, even someone who doesn't work out. Why? Because food's anabolic. Carbs, protein, all that stuff will put muscle on you in small amounts, even without training. And as you gain body weight, moving yourself around becomes more work. You have to have muscle on your body. Pick this up. You don't need much muscle, but you have to have muscle. You have to have muscle to lift your arm. You have to have muscles to stand up. You have to have muscles to walk. Their size still matters. So if you're carrying around extra bulk and you're giving your body extra food, you're going to start with a little more muscle. Now, someone who's really underweight, they're another exception to the rule, just like the teenager is. Why? Because they don't have a normal amount of muscle. So this gets complicated really quick because people who are like, well, I started really underweight. Well, if you're on the BMI scale and you're below the normal end of the BMI when you start lifting weights, you're probably way underweight. So if that's the case, you might exceed that 25 pounds. You might exceed that 30 pounds. If you had 10 pounds less muscle than you should have had on your body as a healthy individual because you were really underweight, you had gotten sick, you were an undereater, you're hyperactive, a lot of things contribute to that. A lot of people have low appetites and they're hyperactive and tend to be underweight. If you're on the low end of the BMI scale or you got really sick and lost muscle, of course you're going to have extra muscle to gain. But again, that muscle doesn't have to be the result of your weight training. That can be just the result of normal weight gain to a healthy body weight. So we really need to differentiate here between these different things. There are different factors at play here. So again, the assumption on that range is assuming you're relatively healthy at the start and at the finish. Not that there is a finish, but it assumes relative health. It assumes you start with a normal amount of muscle weight for your frame. And if you don't, then obviously your numbers are going to be a little different than that. And again, if you're still growing, we can almost toss this out the window because I don't even have the formulas in front of me, but there are even formulas you could look at and realize that you're going to gain X amount of muscle just from growing up. A 15-year-old, a 21-year-old, and a male, that's 6 years that you are going to gain a few pounds of muscle through there. You might even gain 7 or 8 pounds of muscle. You might gain 3 pounds of bone. You could end up having a 10 or 15 pound difference. It has nothing to do with your weightlifting. That's just your normal growth, right? So it's really easy for us to get these topics confused when you look at these exceptions to the rule. The people who are not fully developed and who are starting with amount of muscle that's outside of the healthy range for their body. The other thing to consider here is that this isn't a hard limit. It's not like a hard cap put in place here that when you get to 25 pounds of muscle, you're never going to gain any more muscle. These are what I would call practical limits. Practical limits. Why? Because you'll continue to gain muscle until your hormones and your aging and everything else in your body force you to detrain and to start degenerating muscle tissue. But what we mean is that it works on a set of diminished returns. Well, what does that mean? Diminished returns usually means, as an idea, is that the progress or that you will make in any endeavor like this will be about half every time you double the time frame. All right, it's very easy to gain muscle in your first year lifting. That's why we call it noob gains. That's why we call it noob gains. Now, a person could really goof off their first couple of years and gain a lot less and then come back and make good gains and at least replicate their first year gains again in another year because they really didn't actualize even close to their first year potential. But generally speaking, if you trained relatively hard and relatively smart, doesn't have to be perfect, if you trained decently hard and decently intelligently, with some basic attention to recovery, food, progressive overload, each year you should expect to gain about half the muscle that you gained the year before. So if in the first year you gained 12 pounds of muscle, that second year expect to gain about 6. That third year expect to gain about 3. The fourth year expect to gain about 1.5. Then you're going to drop in below 1 pound a year. And some people say, well, but you could keep doing that for 30 years. Well, not really. Not without TRT, not without drugs. Meaning, if you started training at 20 years old, do you honestly think that when you reach the age of 50, let's say you started at 20, your natural peak is probably going to happen through that diminished return somewhere around the age of 30. By around age 35, you're going to start seeing a small reduction in your hormones. Odds are, from the age of 30 to about 50, if you trained hard for 10 years, your goal is just to try to hold on to what you have beyond a certain threshold, because your recovery is going to be reduced, your anabolic hormones are going to be reduced, your work capacity, connective tissue can over time not be quite as strong as it might have been when you were 30 or 35 as you get older. Therefore, your workloads are going to have to regress a little bit. You'll be lucky at 50 to keep what you have at 30. All right, and that's another practical limitation that people have to keep in mind. As long as you're healthy and able to generate progressive overload and recover, expect the diminished returns each year, about half what you gained the year before. But at a certain threshold, you may no longer be able to recover the same or use the same workloads and tonnage, and you might start to stagnate and eventually regress. I mean, perfect example, Jack LaLanne was in amazing shape in his 80s and 90s, swam the English Channel. Do you honestly think Jack LaLanne at 80 years old had the same muscle that he had at 30? Guy who trained his whole life. Do you really think at 80 years old, after 50 years, he retained all the muscle he had? Of course not. So age does become a factor beyond a certain threshold. Now, people who start later in life can make pretty good gains. Someone starts working out at 40, yeah, they can experience something close to noob gains. They're not going to get the noob gains a 20-year-old gets, but they'll get gains. But at a certain threshold, those gains will taper off quickly as you get older. So another thing to factor in. And then the other big one, the biggest one, is going to be people not differentiating between muscle and intramuscular fat. What I mean is people who lift weights tend to store a little bit more of their fat in their muscle tissue than they do under their skin. The ratios are going to be slightly different. Why? Because if you're active, you're physically active, you exercise a lot, even people who do a lot of cardio, your body needs those triglyceride stores closer to the muscle tissue so it can use them as fuel. Your body's going to tend to store a little more of your fat inside the muscle tissue as you become more active. That's going to make the muscle seem slightly bigger, but let's say you gain from training an extra pound of intramuscular fat through your body, intramuscular triglycerides. Is that really muscle gain? No, it's fat gain. And if you diet down, you'll lose some of that. You'll lose a little bit of that over time sometimes. If you went on a bulk and you stored some of the fat in your muscle, when you diet down, some of it's going to come out of the muscle. So that's one of the things that gets interesting too. A lot of people think that they have more muscle than they think they do, but some of it could be intramuscular fat. Also, people will do things like, well, I started training at 23, I should have been fully developed. I started at 155, fairly lean. I'm now 185, and I'm leaner now. After 3 years or 4 years, I'm leaner now than when I was at 155. But are you? Did you really gain 30 pounds of muscle? What I mean is, if you gain 25 pounds of muscle mass with the same amount of body fat, you're going to look leaner because your muscles are going to be much larger. 25 pounds of muscle. Look at 25 pounds of steak or chicken breast sitting in a pot. Go to a grocery store and look at some of those 5-pound packs of chicken, and then add 5 of those side by side. Realize how much muscle that is spread over your body. Now, if you stayed at the same body fat, the fat around your muscles got spread slightly thinner from the muscles underneath growing. If you gained inches on your arm, inches on your chest, but the fat stayed the same, you're going to look leaner, right? Because the fat's going to be more dispersed. In fact, if you gain 25 pounds of muscle, you could probably put several pounds of extra fat on your body and still look like you have the same amount of body fat as before. In some cases, you might even look a hair leaner. What about if you stored an extra couple pounds of that fat inside your muscle tissue, plumping it up even further? Because if you train, your body tends to store more fat inside your muscle tissue, a little bit more. So you might have a person who's 30 pounds heavier who thinks that they're leaner, but they've actually put on an extra 5 pounds of body fat. They've only gained 25 pounds of muscle. Now, they honestly believe that they're leaner, and I did a skin fold, or I did bioimpedance, and it said that I'm whatever. Those things aren't that accurate. They're not accurate enough to tell you that. But people will do that, and they think, oh, well, no, because I'm leaner 30 pounds heavier. I bet you I gained 35 pounds of muscle, so you're wrong. But you might have only gained 25 pounds. And in your head, you think you're leaner because you look leaner. And for all purposes, for visual purposes, you are leaner. In fact, your body composition might really be very, very similar. In fact, it probably is. 25 pounds of muscle, 5 pounds of fat gain, you're probably going to be the same body fat percentage, even though you gained fat. So that's stuff that people have to factor in too when they say, well, no, you're wrong, and this is why, because I did this or whatever, these are my numbers. But you may not have lost fat. You might think you're leaner, but you might have gained a little fat. But you look leaner, and that's kind of the whole point. That's not a bad thing. In other words, if you gain so much muscle over the course of years of training that you look like you're leaner than when you started, does it really matter that you aren't? Probably not visually speaking. I would say you've probably been pretty successful. In other words, if you gained 30 pounds over your training career completely drug-free and you look leaner and more defined than where you started, that's actually a hell of an accomplishment, whether you got leaner or not. But it can create the illusion in people's head that no, people gain more than that. They really don't. They really don't. But the other thing to consider is I don't want people to think that it's a hard cap and that you should quit striving for progress just because you think you've reached kind of that soft cap. And then what I mean is a soft cap with your muscle gains is the point to where the extra muscle you gain is going to be too small to really measure on a scale. When you start gaining less than a pound of muscle per year, you are effectively at your natural limits. But that doesn't mean you can't keep gaining muscle. It's just going to be really, really slow. It's going to take you a few years to see any progress at that point. You're probably going to have to put in 3 or 4 years of work, of consistent work from that point forward to see improvements. And those improvements aren't going to be as dramatic as you saw your first 6 months in the gym. But you're still improving. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. It's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.